my favorite philosophers that I still continue to read, and he was really impactful for me when I became a Christian, was the 19th century Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard. I don't know, he's not one to pick up lightly, so to speak. He's a very, philosopher, theologian, but sometimes his writing can appear to be quite dense. And he was kind of a weirdo too, Kierkegaard. But he wrote a book that really, really touched me and spoke to me even in those times in my life before I sort of was reconverted, or, as we like to say, born again, when I was in college. And there was one book in particular that I've mentioned before, you've probably heard me talk about. It's called The Sickness Unto Death. And Kierkegaard thought of himself not so much even as a philosopher. He thought of himself as a theologian, but even in some sense as a psychologist. And he said that he defined the sickness unto death as obviously that sickness, which he's lifting this from John chapter 11 when Jesus says about Lazarus, this sickness will not end in death. He said that the worst form of sickness that you could have is, in a sense, what he called spiritual blindness. That being in sin and not knowing that you're in it. That's how he defines spiritual blindness. And he had this quote, and this one was really impactful for me. He says Kierkegaard said there's two ways to be fooled. He said one is to believe what isn't true. Obviously we know that one, you believe a lie. One is to believe what isn't true, and he says the other is to refuse to believe what is true. Look at that. Obviously that's being deceived. You believe a lie. You live a lie. But the other is, I think, a little bit more subtle, and I think one that we don't see too often, especially in ourselves. The other is to refuse to believe what is true. The Bible calls that spiritual blindness. And it's interesting, some of our most famous Christian hymns deal with that concept of spiritual sight and spiritual blindness. The most famous Christian hymn of all time, I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. Now, John Newton, who wrote that song, who is such an active, wonderful participant in the abolition of the British slave trade, was not saying that he was physically blind. But what was he saying? He was saying that until Jesus Christ, until the gospel, until the God of the Bible was able to penetrate his heart in some way, even though he was raised Anglican, he knew God, he knew the Bible, he knew the stories, he knew the prayers, he knew the church services, he knew the liturgy, he knew he'd been to church, and yet he knew, in some sense, after Christ touched him in, I guess, some sort of different way, he looked back even on his church life and realized he was blind the whole time. Now, what is that? G.K. Chesterton is another, that's Kierkegaard. G.K. Chesterton was another British writer. Have you guys heard of G.K. Chesterton? He was probably about, a decade or two earlier than C.S. Lewis in the 20th century, born in the late 19th century, and lived in the early 20th century. And Chesterton tackled this topic. He wrote a number of good books, one called Orthodoxy, which is worth your read, and the other one is called The Everlasting Man, about Jesus. These are wonderful books that every Christian should read. But in one of his books, and I'm blanking on which one of them, I have the quote here, he talked about what are the reasons for spiritual blindness, and how do we deal with that? What is it? And he said, in his experience, spiritual blindness occurs, he says, for a number of reasons. And listen to what he said. He goes, now the best relation to our spiritual home, to having spiritual sight, he said, is to be near enough to love it. Obviously, to be a Christian is what he's saying. To understand who God is, to have spiritual sight, is to be close enough to the thing you're looking at to love it, which is God, to be in proximity. C.S. Lewis picked up on this. He said, people who complain about how their life isn't the way that they had planned and how maybe God is unfair and things in their life are not turning out the way they thought and their life is falling apart. C.S. Lewis said that often we complain about being cold when we won't stand near the fire. He said, if God is the source of life and joy and peace, if he is the author of that, let's just say let's just assume that's true, then of course Lewis would say that your soul needs him as your body would need food. Otherwise, it needs God to flourish. Otherwise, it will just devolve eternally, much like your body would without food. And Lewis said often people have a problem with God when they won't get near enough to even experience him or to touch him or to hear him or to see him. And Chesterton said the best relation to our spiritual home, spiritual sight, is to be near enough, close enough to love it. But then he says this, which took me off guard. But the next best place to be is to be far enough away not to hate it. He says, it is the contention of these pages that while the best judge of Christianity is a Christian, the one who's closest enough to love it, the next best judge would be to be something like a Confucian, he said, or a Buddhist. They're far enough away not to hate it. Isn't that interesting? He said, now you're going to see what he's going to say. What do you think your guess is what he's going to say the worst state to be in? Close enough not to be warmed by it, and not far enough away in order to not hate it. There's a really nasty, milky middle in here. He says that's the worst place to be. And listen to how he defines that. And my guess, I hate to impugn a whole society, but I would say perhaps that this is a really good diagnosis of the 21st century Western civilization. The worst judge of all, the most blind, he says, is the man now most ready with his judgments. I know, you hear this all the time, I know all about Christianity. I've read the Bible. I've read the books. I've read Kierkegaard. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I've read Kierkegaard far more than this guy. And, I've read all these books that everyone should say, and none of this is true, and I know this. They're most ready with the judgments. The ill-educated Christian turning gradually into the ill-tempered agnostic. Let me read that again. The ill-educated Christian turning gradually into the ill-tempered agnostic, entangled in the endless feud of which he never understood from the beginning, blighted with a sort of hereditary boredom. That is so accurate and such good language. Blighted with a sort of hereditary boredom, which he knows not what. And here's the line I highlighted for you, and look at, and already weary of hearing what he has never heard. Wow is right. That's the worst place to be in. That's called spiritual blindness. He's not close enough to have the love of Christ in his heart, this example of a person or a culture, but he's not far enough away. He's not close enough to have the love of Christ in his heart, but he's close enough to where he hates it. And you've heard me joke all the time about how Jesus is the only religious figure that's ever a curse word, because people hate him. Granted, you guys, when Christians are persecuted, it's not because Christians are so nasty and evil that they're persecutable. Underneath all of that is that they're really after Jesus Christ. They really hate Jesus. And you know who said that would happen? Jesus said that would happen. Jesus said, guys, I'm telling you ahead of time here. The Gospel of John says in the first chapter, it says, he was in the world, talking about Jesus Christ, and the world came into being through him, and the world did not know him. He says, furthermore, Jesus came, John chapter 1, he came to his own people, and his own people did not receive him. You would think just the opposite. When the author of life, when the author of creation, when God comes into his creation's midst, into his people's midst, they would receive him. They do not. We do not. Now, why is that? Well, John also says, but to those who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the power to become the children of God, who are born not of the will of man, nor of the will of the flesh, nor the will of a husband, but of God. And Jesus says at the end of that very gospel of John, he says, you guys, in this world, I'm telling you ahead of time so you know, you're going to have trouble. The world hates me, Jesus says. Now, this isn't Christians or a Christian pastor like myself trying to play victim here. These are the words of Jesus himself. And he said, the world hates me. And it's going to hate you too, because a student is not above the teacher. And if they've done this to me when the wood is green, what do you think they're going to do when it is dry? If they do this to the teacher, what do you think they're going to do to the student? And often I think we're just surprised when life doesn't go our way. Like, how can this be? I thought, I was saying my prayers, I was doing it. It's because there's spiritual blindness. You know, spiritual blindness occurs when we think that God owes us something based upon how we perform or how we live. That I've said the prayers, I've raised my kids right, I've done the proper thing, I've taken them to church, they've gotten confirmed. And God, why did you let this happen? Why did I lose my job? Why did you, in a sense, we're kind of saying, you owe me. Well, guys, that's spiritual blindness. Self-salvation is spiritual blindness. Jesus says in John chapter 9, it's another stunning chapter on this topic, because this is what we're going to see in 2 Kings 6, is what is the nature of this spiritual blindness. Jesus said, do you remember when Jesus heals that man born blind? John 9? And he heals him, and everyone freaks out. And at the end of the chapter, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, are investigating the healing. And Jesus has, it's almost at the very end of the 9th chapter, Jesus has this saying to them, because they said to us, are you calling us blind? And Jesus then says, well, because you claim to see, yes, you're blind. That's an interesting, what? Now, he's not saying it in the John Newton sense, I once was blind, but now I see. He's saying that there's a it's Chesterton. There's a prideful arrogance. There's a prideful earning before God where we claim we could see. I can see. I know everything. There's an old story, and it's told, not a story, it's a parable. And many of you have heard this before, and it's a story or a metaphor or a parable that's used to illuminate the fact that all religions are the same and they're all going to the same place, which is probably what most Americans think. Right? You just happen to be Christian. I'm a Hindu, you're Jew, I'm an agnostic. But it's all on the same place. And it's called the parable of the blind man and the elephant, the blind men and the elephant. And let me just tell it really quick. There's 5 blind men. They're blind. And they're all holding on to an elephant, which is supposed to be like God or religion. And one of the blind men, which let's say is Christianity, says, well, holding on to his foot, and says, well, the elephant's leg, and he says, well, I think this animal or whatever it is very sturdy and thick, but there's another blind man that's holding on to the tail, and he says, no. It's not sturdy and thick, it's really thin and loose. And another man is holding on to the trunk, and he's saying, yeah, it's sort of loose, but it's a little bit more thick than I thought, and one's holding on to its ear. It's really thin. It's really thin and it's really wide. And the point of the parable is to say, look, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, whatever, they're all holding on to a piece of the truth, but no one has the whole truth. Until Leslie Newbigin, he was a 20th century British theologian and philosopher, saw a fatal flaw in the premise of the parable. You know what the fatal flaw is? The omniscient narrator claims that he could see the whole elephant, where Christianity and Judaism and Hinduism or whatever, they could only see part, but the modern day 20th century secularists can see the whole thing. Which is exactly what you're accusing Christianity of being. That's spiritual blindness. Let's take a look at this passage. 2 Kings 6. It says, now the king of Aram, we just heard about him for the last couple weeks. That's Syria. This is in 900 BC. The king of Aram and Syria was at war with Israel. We just remember that Elisha healed the prime minister of Syria, and now look at they're back at war together, Naaman last week. And after conferring with his officers, he said, I will set up my camp at such and such a place. So the Syrian king is plotting how he's going to attack and raid Israel. But look at it, says, Elisha, the man of God, sent word to the king of Israel. He says, beware of passing that place because the Arameans are going down there. So Elisha has, I know it's kind of weird, this spiritual connection to be able to go to the king of Israel and say, hey, don't go there. They're going to attack there, so you could avoid getting routed. This is where the Syrians are going to attack. It's almost like Elisha is like this uber spiritual central intelligence agency. He's like the CIA that's tipping them off, tipping the king of Israel off to every movement of Syria. So the king of Israel would check on the place indicated by the man of God, and time and again Elijah warned the king so that he was on his guard in such places. Well, this enraged the king of Syria. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, tell me which of us is on the side of the king of Israel. And he interprets that correctly. He's saying, we have a spy in our midst. How is it that this king of Israel is always one step ahead of us? Obviously, you guys are telling him. Obviously, we have a Benedict Arnold in our midst. Someone's divulging our war plans, and it's obviously one of you. That's why he says, tell me which one of us, which one of you have done this that's on the side of the king of Israel. And look at what his men tell him. They know what's going on. None of us, my lord, the king, said one of his officers, but Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. He knows everything you're going to do. And so the king of Syria now says of Aram, oh, so they have a magic man there. And maybe he's on his Ouija board, or he's on some sort of like spiritual whatever. He has a connection, so he can, like, I don't know, what do they call it when you could appear in someone else's room? You could move your body spiritually around places and listen to people. It's whatever. He has some sort of magic power. And so what do you think the king of Syria is going to conclude when he gets this news that, well, there's a magic man that's tipping the king of Israel off to every move you make? What do you think he's going to do? Go find out where he is, the king ordered, so I could send men and capture him. Well, I'm going to go get this dude. The report came back, he is in Dothan. I want you to remember the name of that city, please. He's in Dothan. So the king of Syria sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. So you have a prophet of God and his assistant, and they're completely surrounded by the entire Syrian army. That's a bad place to be in. Being surrounded is not a good spot. You know, there's a funny story about when there's a famous Marine general named Chesty Puller. Have any of you ever heard of him before? You should have. He's the most decorated Marine in history. Chesty Puller had 5 Navy Crosses. That's a lot. And his son actually wrote a book called Fortunate Son, sort of a play on words with the Creedence Clearwater Revival song. Received a Navy Cross when he was in Vietnam and said, now I only need 4 more. I know, it sounds funny, and you know what happened years later? Chesty Puller's son committed suicide. Why? He could never live up. He could never attain the status. He could never get the plaudits and the praise and the trophies and the medals that his dad had gotten. I mean, this is, and we may say that's an extreme example, but anyway, back to Chesty Puller. Do you know what he said when he was surrounded in the Korean War? I think he was the division commander of the 1st Marine Division. They were surrounded by 500,000 Chinese troops at a place called the Chosin Reservoir. You know what he said? He goes, well, men, he goes, they're in front of us, they're behind us, they're on our left, they're on our right. There's no way the bastards are getting away this time. He says, this is awesome. You could point your weapon in any direction and shoot at the enemy. He says, this is great. He's trying to lift the spirits because he knows being surrounded is really bad. I mean, 10,000 Marines surrounded by 500,000 Chinese troops is not a good situation. This is not a good situation. And at this point, you're liable to say, well, I'm Elisha. I've been following God. I've been being true to God, and this is the net result that I get. You're going to see who has spiritual blindness here. And it's Elisha's assistant that does. Elisha's prophetic assistant. When the servant of the man of God, that's Elisha's assistant, got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. "Oh no, my Lord, what shall we do?" the servant asked. Now you're going to see why we sang that one particular song at the beginning of church today. The song called Surrounded. It may look like I'm surrounded, but what does the song say? But I'm surrounded. You guys sang it, but I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded. And this is what Elisha does. There's another reality, another dimension that for those who know God, I think of Romans 8, where Paul says, there's nothing in this life, neither height nor depth, nor things present, nor things to come will ever be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Jesus Christ. There's a different, for lack of a better term, dimension that maybe we're not able to see. And this is why, I always say this at memorial services, you guys, that it's from the book of Hebrews. And it's so important, I think, to hear at a time when you're struggling and maybe at the death of a loved one, where you hear that the Bible defines faith in a certain way. It says faith is the hope and the conviction of things that you can't see. And that's where the Christian faith sucks. I'm a Christian pastor, and I'm telling you, I don't like that. I don't like that God works like that. I mean, I know it's my old sinful self, but I don't like the fact that I have to hold him in a trust that everything that I see would contradict. Are you tracking with me? I don't like that. That's why constantly I think Christians get almost too spiritual, where they're always like, Lord, show me a sign, show me a sign, show me a sign. Why? Because faith is too hard. Trust is too difficult. I need to see. You got to show me something. You got to show me something. Elisha's servant gets to see. But I think it's also to show us that spiritual... I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. How do I say this? Physical sight doesn't mean spiritual sight, and spiritual sight doesn't mean physical sight. I mean, some of us, I'm almost 50. Some of you guys have lived for a long, you've had many years and getting long in the tooth. And, the older you get, I had a guy I did a funeral for a number of years ago, and he said, this is at my last church. And he said, the thing I've learned about life is the older I get, the more stuff I just get taken away. He says, maybe you get your job taken away. Maybe a child gets taken away. Your good looks start to get taken away as you get older. Your physique gets taken away. Your ability to do certain things that you were able to when you were young gets taken away. Your ability to play athletics gets taken away. And you know what else happens as you grow older too? Your ability to start to move gets taken away. Maybe your sight gets taken away. Your spouse gets taken away. And finally, you know what happens? Everything that you have gets taken away. And then in the very end, you get taken away. And that's his point. Everything gets taken away. And that's where trusting God is. Marx always said religion is the opiate of the people. That is, people want to believe in that so they can make themselves feel better about life. I think it's just the opposite. I think it's I think it's way easier to just say, oh, this is all just chance and I'm not going to believe in anything. I'm not going to believe in anything. I think that's much easier. I think it's so much harder and so much more difficult and experientially to believe in a God who would send his son to die for me and loves me unconditionally and will never leave me nor forsake me in the face of experiences in life that contradict that at almost every moment. That's hard. That's not easy. I could trust in a good God when everything in this world is not good that I'm experiencing. How do you do that? How do you know when you're surrounded? Well, God's on your side. I don't think so. Prove it to me. Everything in life seems to show I'm surrounded. And as a matter of fact, like C.S. Lewis said, after his wife died of cancer, Lewis's mom died of cancer when he was a young man, and then his wife dies of cancer when he's an older man. Which, if you've read the Narnia Chronicles, you know why C.S. Lewis, in one of the books called The Magician's Nephew, had a little boy whose mom was dying of cancer. And Aslan, the Christ figure in those fairy tales, Aslan, who is Jesus Christ, allows him to take some healing fruit home, and Aslan is able to heal his mom from cancer. Why do you think Lewis wrote that? He's addressing an old wound. He's addressing how he's felt surrounded his whole life. That's what he's doing. And then his own wife dies of cancer after he wrote the Narnia Chronicles. That's why he wrote a great book. You should put it on your list, called A Grief Observed. He didn't write it to be published. It was his personal journal right after his wife died of cancer. And you could see the great defender of Christianity, the most popular and most influential Christian writer of the 20th century, doubting God because he was surrounded. Faith's hard. It's not simple. It's difficult. So I resonate with this man way more than I do with Elijah. I resonate with this man almost more than anyone in the Bible. "Oh no, my Lord, what shall we do?" the servant asked. "We're surrounded. We're going to die." What does Elijah do? "Don't be afraid," the prophet answered. Yeah, easy for you to say. "There's something going on that you can't see. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." What does the Apostle Paul say in Romans 8? You guys, that chapter, well worth your time probably to crack open even once a day and read Romans chapter 8. I said when we were doing our series on the book of Romans that I think it's the most important and most influential chapter of the whole Bible. Romans chapter 8. Paul says what? If God is for us, who could be against us? Well, my response to Paul, if I was in this situation, I would have said, obviously the thousands of people that are surrounding us could be against us. Like, this is the stupidest. In that way, you look at it from a very humanistic standpoint, you can say this is the stupidest chapter in all the Bible. And Paul says, no. If God is for us, who could be against us? Well, a lot of people could be against us. And Paul says, stop. He who did not withhold his own son, but gave him up for us all, would he not, in Jesus Christ, give you everything you need? What does the great hymn, the wonderful song, "Great is Thy Faithfulness," say? All I have needed, Thy hand hath provided. But see, there's the disconnect. But God, you're giving me what you think I need. I don't think I need that. And I want something else. I don't like the way you comfort. And Paul is saying that it's almost as if the Apostle Paul wants to pray exactly like Elijah and say this, I know it's hard now, but there's something that you can't see that you're going to have to trust. Well, what is that? From a New Testament perspective, we would say, Jesus Christ has been raised from the dead. And Paul says also in that great chapter, do you know what he says, chapter 8? The same power that raised Jesus Christ from the dead is in you. That same cosmic power that could reverse the laws of physics to make a dead man's amino acids rekindle, to make the same valved heart start to beat again from death. That's the laws of physics in reverse. That same power that is able to do that, which is probably more so, if not as powerful, as what generated the whole universe in the beginning, you have that in your life. And if Jesus Christ has been raised from the dead, that means that the greatest enemy has already been conquered, which is death itself. That's the greatest enemy. You want to talk about the big bully? There's little bullies that we face all the time. Like I've said, maybe sickness or the loss of a hope or a dream. Those are little bullies. The biggest bully's already been beat. And that should tell us that if Jesus Christ is taking care of the biggest bully, let these little bullies just be what they are, like gnats. There was a famous poet who said, before Jesus Christ was raised from the dead, death was an executioner. After Jesus Christ has been raised from the dead, death is just a gardener. It's a beautiful language, isn't it? Don't be afraid. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. You see, Elisha's servant is blind. He's spiritually blind to what's going on around him. And Elisha prayed, open his eyes, Lord, that he may see. You know, I had a lady in my last church tell me this. That's the prayer she would pray for her children over and over and over and over and over. Helen Keller said there are none those that are so the blindest people in the world. Now, Helen Keller was blind and deaf, right? The most blind people are those that refuse to see. Refuse. And this lady at my church said, I used to pray this for my kids. Oh Lord, open their eyes so that they may see. And it's almost like God gives Elisha and his servant here just a little peek. Sometimes he does that. Most of the time, you have to walk on faith. You have to live by faith. You have to trust in things you can't see, which I said. What did I say about that? I said a dirty word in church. It sucks. But you know, sometimes God gives he gave a peek to the Apostle John who wrote Revelation. I know we're all scared to read Revelation. It's a beautiful book. Did you know most of the most famous Christian hymns that we have come from the book of Revelation? Holy, 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 Revelation. Yes, we'll gather at the river. You know that one? The beautiful, Revelation. Crown him with many crowns, Revelation. How about for you old crusty Lutherans out there? This is the feast of victory for our God. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. Revelation. It's a beautiful book. It's got some crazy stuff in it, I'll grant you, but there's some beautiful stuff. Well, at the end of that, you know, God gives John, who wrote the book, a peek. And John, look at when John is writing this, you know, most scholars, New Testament scholars, historians say that this John was probably writing this in like the 90s. That's the 90s of the first century, not like the Milli Vanilli 1990s. And think in the 90s that John has been now exiled on an island called Patmos in the Mediterranean. Peter is gone. James is gone. Paul is gone. All the disciples, they're all gone. They're all dead. And John alone is left. Exiled. Just waiting to die. And Jesus Christ gave him a little peek. He didn't need it, but he gave it to him. And John says in chapter 21, he said, and then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. He's seeing the future, and he says, for the old heaven and the old earth had passed away. And he said, and then I heard a voice coming from the throne of God, and it said, behold, look, that's another way of saying look, God's home is now with his people now. He said, and there will be no, and you know what John describes when he gets a vision of heaven? He describes more of what's not there than what's there. He says, there will be no more mourning, mourning. There will be no more mourning, there will be no more crying, there will be no more tears, and there will be no more death. For the old order of things has passed away. And then he said, you know what? He said, then the one who was on the throne, Jesus Christ, said to him, I am the first and the last, the beginning and the end, the Alpha, the Omega. And then he says to John, write these things down, for they are trustworthy. You could trust them. And do you know why Jesus told John to write these things down? John saw it. Why does he need to write it down then? For you. For me. In other words, Jesus is saying, I've been raised from the dead, John. I'm going to give you, and I want you to write this down, everyone else, a peek of what the cosmic victory that you can't see actually has already occurred. And I'm going to let you see it, John, so that I could speak to believers in my name, 2,000 over your head, John, 2,000 years all the way into Tacoma at 1315 North Stevens Street on October the 5th, 2025. That's wild, isn't it? It may look like you're surrounded. Open eyes, Lord, so that he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. It may look like I'm surrounded, but what does the song say that we sang this morning? But I'm surrounded by you. It may look like I'm surrounded, but I'm surrounded by you. I have a cool little Sunday school picture from an old, super weird 1960s Bible cartoon book that I had when I was a kid. I didn't grow up in the 60s. I grew up in the 80s, but the book was from the 60s. That's Elisha with his servant. It may look like we're surrounded. That's really the situation, though. You don't really see the situation. That's really what's going on in your life. C.S. Lewis said that Christians in this age right now, we still struggle. Christians grieve like other people do, but what does Paul say in 1 Thessalonians 4? We don't grieve as those who have no hope. I don't know if you catch that, but there's a pretty big distinction that he makes there with grief. The first thing he says is that Christians grieve like when you lose someone, let's say you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to grieve. And Paul says you lose someone and you believe in Jesus, you're going to grieve. Christians grieve. He says, but we don't grieve as those who have no hope. Well, what's the difference between grieving with hope and grieving without hope? I joke, only eternity. It's a pretty big difference. That's a pretty big difference if it's true. If it's not true, it's just a delusion. But if it's true, it's the truth that shines over all things in this world. This is the reality, Paul says. Why do Christians grieve with hope? Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 4, beginning in verse 13, he says, because we believe Jesus died and rose again. Do you see how he anchors his hope? That's so important, so critical. The foundation of the hope is not that, when life throws you lemons, you make lemonade, and every cloud has a silver lining. He says, no. Why do we grieve with hope? Because Jesus died and rose again. And because Jesus died and rose again, death has been defeated, we know that God is going to bring those loved ones that we have lost with us together, and we will be with Jesus forever. We know that because Christ has been raised from the dead in time. And Paul is saying this isn't a myth, this isn't just wishful thinking. The dead man that came back to life, Those apostles said, we saw him, we touched him, we ate with him. I mean, what do you expect us to do with that kind of information? Just say, well, Jesus, I know you're right here, and I know you're eating in front of me, and I know you were dead and you're alive again, and I know I'm touching you, but like, is this a mythic story that I'm experiencing right now? No, it's reality. That's what happened. And do you know what most scholars of the New Testament say? This is interesting. And when I mean most, I mean like 99%, and almost 40% of New Testament scholars consider themselves atheist or agnostic. They will concur that historically we could know with the greatest certitude. And do you know who said this? There was a guy, and I'm blanking on his name right now, and I know him like I know my last name. But he considers himself an agnostic atheist who doesn't believe Jesus died and rose again. But he will concede historically that the disciples of Jesus Christ had authentic experiences that they thought were of the risen Christ, and they were physical manifestations. Now, he may say they were hallucinating physical things, but nonetheless, he says they had that experience. If Jesus died and rose again, you know what George MacDonald said? He was another contemporary of C.S. Lewis. He says, you guys, then no matter what happens in this life, the whole thing is full of the dawn of an eternal morning, coming up from beyond the hills that not even the poet or the artist has even a glimmer of yet. We don't have a glimmer of it yet. But you know what we do have? We have the promise of God in word, in promissory form in word. And that's why we're here. C.S. Lewis said, have you ever thought about why sometimes it's so hard to come to church? When I was a kid, I didn't even contemplate it. I just didn't want to go. Right? And I would usually credit it with boring and stuff like that. But now that I got a little bit older and I began to think about it, it's like, you know, I go to school just fine. I go to the store. I go to practice just fine. I go to work just fine. Why is it that I have such a strong revulsion against this place? You know what C.S. Lewis said in Mere Christianity? He said, we're like people in enemy-occupied territory. He was thinking in World War II. I picture Anne Frank up in the attic listening to the BBC to see where the Allies are because they know their liberation is coming. And he said, we're like that. And he said, do you think the Nazis liked that people in Denmark and Sweden and France, these occupied countries, were listening to the BBC about how the Americans and the British were advancing and we're going to liberate them soon? Do you think the Nazis liked that? No, they didn't. That's why they had Joseph Goebbels, who was a propaganda master. And Lewis said, similarly, the devil, the world, and your sinful self does not like you here because we're gathered together today in an attic listening to the ultimate eternal BBC. Amen. Well, that's his image, and he says that's why the devil doesn't want you here. He doesn't want you listening to messages from the king about how you already have been liberated and the true king is on his way. He doesn't want you to hear that. He wants you to think you're surrounded and there's no hope. He doesn't want you to see this. He wants you to see this and keep you blind. As the enemy came down toward him, I'll speed this up because we got to get going. Elisha prayed to the Lord, strike this army with blindness. So he struck them with blindness, and as Elisha had asked. That word blindness in the Hebrew doesn't mean like Helen Keller blindness, Stevie Wonder blindness, you know. It could almost mean like confusion or delusion. You could translate it blindness too. It's a word that has pretty wide semantic range in regards to sight or being confused. I think the better translation is blindness/confusion. So Elisha prays to God, and God strikes the Syrian army with blindness. Elisha told them, he goes, this is not the road, this is not the city. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man you are looking for. Well, it's like, that's why I don't believe about Elisha's lying. They're looking for Elisha. And Elisha pulls, no joke, I read this in a highly esteemed academic commentary. Elisha pulls a Jedi mind trick here, an Obi-Wan Kenobi Jedi mind trick. These are not the droids you're looking for. Is he lying? Well, I don't know. Is this a white lie? I don't know. It's like Linus said to Charlie Brown, lies come in colors? That's weird. But I will lead you to the man you were looking for. There's more going on here. And he led them to Samaria, which was the capital of Israel at that time. After they entered the city, Elisha said, Lord, open the eyes of these men so they could see. Then the Lord opened their eyes, and they looked, and they were inside Samaria. So obviously they weren't physically blind because Elisha led them, said, we're going to go this way. And they're just like, oh, okay. They could still see. They were just confused, deluded, blind in some way, but not physically blind. When the king of Israel saw this, what do you think he's going to do? He asked Elisha, let's kill him. We got all the rats gathered in one nest right here. Look at what the Lord has done for us. Look at, they're coming, they came to capture the man of God, and look at now they've become captured by God. Slaughterhouse time. Let's kill all them. Let's have a major victory. Shall I kill them? And what does Elisha say? Don't kill them, he answered. Would you kill those you have captured with your own sword or bow? He's saying, like, guys, we wouldn't even do this if the Lord captured them, but you shouldn't even do this if we captured them. Like, look at, there was even still some morality and ethics in warfare even back then. This is crazy. Set food and water before them so that they may eat and drink and then go back to their master. The king of Israel's like, Dan, I would have said, get the machine guns out. Ivan Drago style, you're dead, right? That's what I would be like, we're going to kill them all. And Elisha says, no, let's have a party. That is so bizarre. So instead of killing them, what does he do? He feeds them. They have a party. That's grace. He shows grace. He shows mercy. He shows forgiveness. He shows love. The last thing they deserved. There's an old story that's a woman came up to Napoleon in the 19th century and prayed that her son was going to be executed for I can't remember, running away in battle, and she said, Emperor, please show grace, show mercy. And Napoleon said, your son does not deserve grace or mercy. And the mother said, I know. If he did, it wouldn't be grace. It wouldn't be mercy. That's the beautiful thing about the gospel. You're getting an image of what Jesus Christ has done for us right here. Guys, what do we deserve? We deserve to be slaughtered. You know, we deserve to be killed. And what does God do? The Apostle Paul says in Romans 6, while we were his enemies, while we were fighting him, Isaiah 53 said, all we like sheep had turned aside and had gone to our own way, and the Lord laid on him the iniquity of us all. While we were enemies of God, Christ Jesus died for us. Not when we were on our way back home like the prodigal son, at least we were on our own 2 feet. Not after we had repented, not after we had cleaned our lives up, not after we had gotten our act together. Before all that, when we're against him, when we're his enemies, that's when God sent his son. Literally when we had nothing to offer except vitriol and hatred and murder, and that's all we have to offer. That's when God sent his son to die for us. Do you see how insane this is? And that's exactly what Elisha does here. Because if I were the king of Israel, I would have said, these people have been raiding us. These people have been kidnapping our children. These people have been probably killing their parents in front of them. These people have been raping our women. These people have been stealing our possessions. These people deserve, and you know what? They're right. They do deserve that. And you know what the New Testament message is? All that we deserve has fallen onto the shoulders of the one who didn't deserve it. Huh? It's not that the punishment wasn't meted out. The punishment was just meted out on someone other than you and me. It was on Jesus Christ. All the evil, all the sin, all the deserving, all the malevolence of this world was just heaped on his shoulders. he sets a feast, and they go back home. And I love this. It says, so he prepared a great feast for them, and after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away, and they returned to their master. And I love this. So of course that's correct. The bands of Syria stopped raiding Israel's territory. Look at those Syrian soldiers who were blind. They got sight. Elisha said, I'm going to lead you to the man you're looking for. And what did they find? They found the true man. They found God himself. Check this out. 2 last things, I promise. Did you know 900 years later, there was a group of soldiers that came and surrounded another great prophet? You know that, right? In the Garden of Gethsemane? And one of the followers of Jesus said, Lord, let's pull out our swords. Let's kill him. And Jesus said, what? Put your sword away, Peter. He said, do you not know I could call all the chariots of heaven and legions of angels? Just like this. Except that Jesus did suffer the penalty of being surrounded. This Elisha ultimately led us to the true man, the true king, the true God. That's the man Elisha was leading them to. And 900 years later, it's right to the ultimate man, Jesus Christ. I'll show you the man you're looking for. And the second thing, really quick. Do you remember I talked about Dothan? Do you guys remember that? And I'll end with this. Where's Dothan here? Hold on. Did I pass it? There we go. He's in Dothan. Did you know all the people of Israel would have known about that town during this time in 900 BC? Would have been a well-known place. And it's a well-known place because of a certain event that happened in Genesis chapter 37. In Genesis 37, they're in Dothan. And now, hundreds of years later, about 1,000 years later, they're in Dothan. Elisha's in Dothan. So you have the same city, about 800 years apart. Here, Elisha prays to God at Dothan in the midst of trouble, and God delivers him immediately, right? 900 years earlier, 800 years earlier, there's another man of God who's in Dothan, and he prays to God for deliverance, too. His name is Joseph. And Joseph was thrown into a pit by his brothers at Dothan. Elisha prays, God delivers. Joseph, the book of Hebrews tells us, cried out to God from the pit that he was thrown into. And God doesn't answer. Genesis 37, Joseph's thrown in the pit, no angels come, no miracle. 800 years later, Elisha prays at the same place. Boom. Amazing miracle. What's going on? What's going on here? Look at how God works. This is beautiful. Here he answers immediately, Genesis 37. Joseph is taken out of this pit and then forced into slavery in Egypt. And while he's in slavery in Egypt, he still trusts and he still obeys God. And for all his trusting God and obeying God, he gets elevated to be like one of Pharaoh's assistants. And you know what happens when he's trusting God and obeying God and doing well in his job? He gets falsely accused of sexual assault. And he was running away from a woman that was trying to seduce him, and she grabbed part of his shirt and ripped it off, and she showed her husband, look, this Hebrew was in our house, and he tried to rape me. And so Joseph, for trusting God and obeying God and not committing adultery, ends up now not in a pit, but now he's in a dungeon for obeying God. And there he prays, and there he prays, and there he prays. Nothing. And Joseph ends up elevating himself because of his trust in God again. And Joseph ends up being the figure that all the people of Israel are delivered by virtue of his position after he goes through this tremendous pit where he gets no response to God. Look, in one instance, God answers immediately, and in another instance, it's like maybe years later you'll see. Maybe it's not going to be till you die. But we do have Jesus. The book of Hebrews says, though we don't see heaven right now, we do see Jesus. And you know what else Hebrews says? Who is the author and the perfecter of our faith, the pioneer, the archegos, the champion. Jesus, our brave soldier, our general, our admiral, our king. The pioneer, the book of Hebrews says he's the first one in. He goes before all of us into death. That's what's beautiful. You have that. And Jesus Christ, when he goes into death, he came back from it and said, you guys, it's okay, you could go in too. I know it looks bad, I know it looks scary, but it's okay, I've been there, and I've taken care of it for you. And I need you to trust me on this one. It's all okay. How do you know, Jesus, it's going to be okay? How do you know? Because God raised his son from the dead. That's what Paul says in Romans 8. So I know ultimately the ultimate ending is going to be, it's okay. I know it sucks now, but it's going to be okay. I promise you, God says. I promise you. I want you to hear that right now at 11:23 at Emmanuel. It's going to be okay. I promise. I raised my son from the dead. I promise, I promise, I promise, I promise, I promise you. But I can't see it. I know, but it's going to be okay. I promise you that I am for you. I'm not against you. I'm for you. I'm for you. And even if you could be in the dungeon, like Joseph, I'm with you. You could be surrounded, and like Elisha and a servant, and I'm with you. You could be in the deepest depths of despair where you feel like your life isn't worth living anymore. I promise I'm there with you too. I'm for you. I'm for you. I'm for you. I'm for you. Please trust me. Please trust me. That's what God is saying to you today through this passage. So trust him. So Lord, we thank you for this passage and pray that, I don't know, if there's anyone that needs to have their open their eyes, Lord, so that they may see, like the prayer of Elisha. Thank you, Lord, that at the times we feel surrounded, we're not. We know that you have the ultimate victory that you've given us through your Son, Jesus Christ. Help us to see that. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, Don.
Thank you, Pastor. So I just want to point to a couple of quick things that, if kind of along the lines of next steps, how you can take a next step in your faith journey. And I would just say, in listening, that whole idea of being surrounded is, we live in a world, I don't know if I'm aware of it, and maybe you are too, where we've never been more surrounded. I mean, there's so many people in the world, and never have we been so connected by a Zoom or, FaceTime or whatever. And yet the experts tell us that never have we been more lonely as people. Loneliness is just going up. And so apparently we're more and more surrounded and also more and more unseen. And so just a couple of quick things here that you can do, that we can all do as a church, because I think the church is an antidote to that. We should be in church and we should always feel seen, right? Which is wonderful from Pastor Shaw's message. So if you're new, please take a moment to go to the info booth. It's right in back, and there's a gift for you, and we'd love to just say welcome and connect with you. I promise you no one will follow you home or show up in your driveway when you're cleaning out your garage. But we'd love to welcome you. And if you've been, regardless of how long you've been coming here to church, try and seek somebody out that you haven't spoken to before, and just welcome them. It doesn't have to be a big, long, drawn-out thing, but, there's this thing called the butterfly effect. Are you familiar with it? It's the science where, a couple of butterflies can flap their wings on one side of the earth, and it causes a tornado on the other side of the earth. So this may sound trivial, but that's how God works. So God bless you. Pastor?
Before we go, let's sing that first verse we all know by heart from John Newton, Amazing Grace. Let's sing this together, so don't make me solo, okay? Amazing grace. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine on you and be gracious unto you. The Lord look upon you with favor and give you his peace. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. God bless you. Go in peace and serve the Lord.